Hello and welcome to the last of the Roaring Twenties lessons. Today we're going to be talking about prohibition. But first, as we do with every lesson, let's take a look at how far we've come. We started with early settlement into America by people coming across the Bering Strait and building all these different kinds of tribes and languages and cultures. And then European colonization arrived here and they started to populate the land that was already populated. Conflicts were abundant during this time, including conflicts with their home countries. Specifically would be England with the British colonies. So there was conflict there that led to the Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War ended with the establishment of the new republic being the United States of America. It's very hard to get a country off the ground, so what we had to do was institute new innovations like the steam engine and the telegraph, but also institute slavery. And slavery is something that is obviously unconstitutional. It's against the ideals of America, so it became very controversial and very conflicting within the country, and it led to the Civil War, the American Civil War, a horrific series of battles and events that came in the 1860s that ended with Reconstruction trying to rebuild. Do we punish the South? Do we pardon the South? There was a whole bunch of different debates and conflicts within that. We even had a president be impeached during that time, but we got through it even though in the South segregation became mainstream. Then we looked at the Gilded Age and how wealth was being accrued by people in the very top of society, but it came at the expense of people at the bottom of society. And then we looked at how do we fix some of those problems? Well, that's with the Progressive Era. Under the Progressive Era, we had talked about how there was all kinds of new regulations put on businesses and put safety measures in factories and things like that. But then we also talked about the way that America, with this newfound wealth, would become a little bit imperialist. So we got involved in a war, the Spanish-American War. We also got involved in Panama to build a canal. We got involved in China to get access to their markets. Then we touched a little bit on the Wild West, cowboy culture and the real eradication of Native Americans in free lands and kind of putting them on reservations. After that, we went into the World War I and how destructive and horrific World War I is. And then we landed here in the 1920s and all the different parts of the 1920s. We talked about the politics, we talked about the economics, we talked about pop culture. Last class, we talked about evolution, the debate on, how are we here? And was Earth just evolved to be the way it is, or was it created? And then we went into xenophobia and fear of others and foreigners and Sacco and Vanzetti trial and things along those lines, because that stuff still is pertinent today. But today we're going to cover prohibition of alcohol, which was a very big thing in the 1920s. I discussed this in the past. I talked about how this was something that was started in the women's rights culture, the idea of men spending all their money at the bar and then coming home and being abusive, and the temperance movement. I talked about how the 18th Amendment, which banned alcohol, was actually a part of the progressive era because it was a way to progress and say, let's get this poison out of society. But now we're going to slow down and take a look at prohibition and find some lessons that we can apply to the modern world from this situation of the 1920s. And now you're warm up to get the creative juices flowing in your head. Think about this and take this seriously. What if candy was prohibited by anyone under the age of 21 here in America? I mean, think about it. Alcohol is prohibited to people under the age of 21 here in America. In several states, tobacco is prohibited to people under the age of 21 here in America. Well, sugar is linked to the number 1 and number 2 causes of death by people, which is heart disease and cancer. In a lab, when they want to feed cancer cells, they feed it glucose, they feed it sugar. We know that highly processed sugary foods are not good for you. Candy is not good for you. So what if it was banned to kids? Trick-or-treating wouldn't have the same flavor if you just, were handed a peach or something like that. Would you actually follow it? Would parents follow it? The intention would be that our children would be healthier and happier. Is that what would actually happen? Would people obey this rule or not? I mean, take this seriously. It's absolutely possible. We're going to be talking about how alcohol was banned. I mean, look around at how popular alcohol is here in America. And that was only 100 years ago. They banned alcohol. It's absolutely possible that they banned sugar for people under the age of 21. What would happen? Play the kind of story for a couple of years into that prohibition of candy. What do you think would happen? All right, now moving on to prohibition of alcohol. How did this happen? How could they ban alcohol? Like, so many people love alcohol. Now all of a sudden it's an illegal drug on the same level as something like cocaine or marijuana? In fact, more illegal than marijuana today, because at least states have it legalized in several states. It's a Schedule I illegal drug by the United States, but individual states have legalized it even for recreational use. So this banned the sale of alcohol across all 50 states. Well, it wasn't 50 states at the time, but you get the point. In 1919, the 18th Amendment was passed to ban the sale of alcoholic beverages, propaganda aligning it with World War I and robber barons, and it was pushed by very vocal Christian women activists. So how did this happen? Well, they aligned it with certain other causes, like World War I. A lot of the beer that was drank in America was German beer. We were at war with Germany in World War I. They were part of the Central Powers, so it's like if you buy German beer, you're supporting the enemy. So that was one thing. Also, who owned the breweries? Who owned the alcohol distributors? Well, those were really rich people. Those were robber barons. We don't like robber barons. Remember those terrible robber barons? Yeah, so every time you go to drink alcohol, you're supporting these robber barons. You're supporting the elite. Let's not support those. Also, don't forget about all the poor women and children that are abused because of their drunken fathers and drunken grandfathers and uncles and brothers that are at the bar wasting all of the family's money. So a very small but vocal minority pushed this through. It was Christian women who were part of the temperance movement, and they really were loud. Look, think about things today. There's a lot of activists out there that belong to a population that's very, very small, a very minor part of the American population, but they are so vocal and they're so loud and they have such a story to tell that a lot of people listen to them and go, okay, yeah, sure, whatever you want. It was kind of like that a very small group said, hey, we need to ban alcohol, you need to ban alcohol. What are you, a bad guy? You're supporting these bad ideas? No. And they kind of intimidated people into saying, okay, fine, I'll vote for prohibition. And it worked. Pretty unbelievable. People who like drinking actually voted to say like, all right, I guess this is the right thing to do, and it actually passed. I mean, it's quite a shock. Going from people drinking like they are today, drinking beers and going out to restaurants and bars, drinking wine, drinking beer, drinking cocktails, whatever it is, to all of a sudden gone, illegal. They went to all these bars and restaurants, they cracked open the kegs of beer and poured them down the drain. They poured the bottles of wine, gone. No more alcohol. People were shocked. I mean, remember the first lesson in the 1920s. It was a good economy. A lot of people were doing very, very well during the 1920s. And if you win the lottery, or you start making a lot of money, or you get a big promotion at work, what do you do that night? A lot of people celebrate. And how do people celebrate? At least here in America, they celebrate with alcohol. If you're an adult and you say, I'm having a party, the assumption is that there will be alcohol there. It's just so ingrained in our culture. So people were kind of doing well. They were listening to jazz music, they were partying, like we just got finished with a world war. The economy was growing. People wanted to drink. And they couldn't because it was made illegal. But remember, where there is a demand, there is an opportunity. It's a good thing for you future business leaders and entrepreneurs out there. Remember I talked about supply and demand? If there is a demand, there is an opportunity. There was a demand for alcohol, even though it was illegal. Look, people demand things regardless of what the law says. We know that. If candy was banned, you would still want it. And if you wanted it, there was that demand, someone might step up and supply it. They might go and they might make their own candy and they might sell it to you on the street. This was operating illegally. It was like creating drugs, which alcohol is a drug. Make no mistake, alcohol absolutely is a drug. So people stepped up to provide a supply to meet the massive demand for alcohol, even though it was illegal. These people, if they lived in like an apartment or in a building in a more urban setting, they would brew it in their bathtub. They'd call it bathtub gin. If they're in a more rural area out in the countryside, they would go out in the middle of the night. They'd build these stills out in the dark in the woods. They would call it moonshine because they would do it under the shining of the moon. And they also made it very, very potent because before a prohibition, a lot of people were drinking beer. Beer was the most popular alcoholic beverage in America. But what happened was it got prohibited, so people pulled away from beer and leaned toward hard alcohol. Bathtub gin, moonshine was very, very, very strong. Alcohol, like beer, might be 5 or 6% alcohol, where moonshine was like 90% alcohol. It was very, very potent. So something I like to explain to my students, and I do not promote underage drinking. If you wanted to sneak into your bedroom with a couple of your friends and drink and have alcohol, which is illegal and against the rules of your household, and there were 8 of you, would you bring beer? Would you be clanking a whole bunch of beer bottles or beer cans in a backpack, walking past your parents in the living room? Probably not. It takes a lot of beer to get 8 people, drunk, if that's what the goal was. But You could take one bottle of vodka, one bottle, or one small bottle of moonshine that was really, really strong, and you can smuggle that in easier. Right now in America, we have a real problem with a drug called fentanyl. Fentanyl is extremely potent. It's like 50 times more potent than heroin, which is, again, a very dangerous drug. Why is fentanyl so popular? Well, one of the reasons is because it doesn't take a lot to get you high. So instead of smuggling in boxes and boxes and boxes of heroin, you can smuggle in just one small envelope of fentanyl, and it's so potent that you just take a little bit and you can distribute the same as it would in many, many boxes and packages of heroin. It's kind of a similar thing. Moonshine was very, very strong because it was more easy to transport and smuggle into places because it was illegal. It was the illegality that made more potent alcohol out in the scene, which was hurting people. In addition to that, when the government found out about these bootleggers going out and distributing illegal alcohol, they actually ran operations to poison some of the illegal alcohol as a way to deter people. Be like, you don't know what you're getting. You might get something that's really, really toxic, something that's really poisonous. If you're buying a beer from a grocery store or something like that, you know what you're getting. But if you get a beer from someone out on the street, you don't know what you're getting. It makes it very, very dangerous. If you're going to buy drugs from a pharmacy, you know what's in that drug. But if you're gonna buy drugs from someone out on the street or at a club or something, you have no idea what's in it. And that was a major danger of the time, was people buying alcohol and they didn't know what was in it. Maybe it was poison, maybe it was corrupted somehow, maybe it was rotten, and people could get very, very sick. But the demand was there, they still wanted it. I mean, who would take the risk of brewing this alcohol and distributing it? Well, people who are okay with breaking the law. Who was that? It was mobsters, people from organized crime syndicate. You gotta think about organized crime like it's a business that provides something that is just illegal. So a business, just like Coca-Cola or Apple or whatever it is, but Apple computers are not illegal, Coca-Cola is not illegal. But if Coca-Cola became illegal, they would still run their operation. It would be like a business, like a hierarchy, there's a boss, all that kind of stuff, but it was on the outside realm of the law, the black market as they call it, the underground market. So just like drug dealers today, which run giant organizations, like over the border in Mexico, the cartels there are extremely powerful. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars flowing to them constantly. They are very powerful, it's a very successful business, but they're very dangerous people that operate outside of the law because by definition, they are criminals. The most famous bootlegger, the most famous organized crime boss of the time was a guy named Al Capone. They called him Scarface. You can see a little scar on his face that he got in a fight when he was younger. And he was in and out of prison. He spent time in Alcatraz. He drove around town in a bulletproof Cadillac. He was a very charming, very scary man who got a lot of power in society because people wanted alcohol so bad. They said, I want alcohol, I want alcohol. Whoever will give it to me, I'll give them my money. And he gained a lot of power. He was very feared by anyone who was trying to take him down because he had so much power and so many resources, and he was willing to operate outside of the law. So Coca-Cola doesn't like Pepsi. They're not gonna blow up the Pepsi plant, but in bootlegging, they will. If those are my rivals, I will just kill them. The police were pretty ineffective in stopping people like Al Capone and all these bootleggers for a bunch of reasons. One is they were bribed. So if they pull over someone, they have alcohol in their car, they'd say like, do you have alcohol? It's like, yeah, but here's 2 weeks salary. I'm making so much money. Here's 2 weeks salary, just look the other way. And they might do it. There's a documentary called Cocaine Cowboys that breaks down how the cocaine industry grew in Miami in the 1980s. And what they would say is that when a police officer would pull you over, you might have $2 million worth of the drug in your trunk. So it was worth it for you to bribe the police officer with like $100,000 just to not arrest you. And $100,000 at the time would be like 3 or 4 years' salary. I mean, everyone kind of has their price. So a lot of police officers at the time were bribed by the bootleggers to look the other way and avoid getting arrested. Also, if that didn't work, they would threaten them. I mean, these are people who operate outside of the law. These are criminals. These are people with access to firearms and things like that. And police officers would get threatened. It's like, here, take this money. I don't want the money. Then I'll kill you or I'll hurt your family or something terrible like that. Okay, I'll take the money. I mean, it really puts people in a tough situation because pushing up against these murderous bootleggers and organized crime bosses and stuff like that wasn't easy to do even for police officers. But lastly, a lot of police officers like to drink. And the fact is that not everyone is behind the law. There are police officers their job is to enforce the law, but if you don't believe in the law, you don't think the law is a good law, it's like, oh, they're just drinking alcohol, that was fine just a couple of months ago, then they didn't enforce it. So police were really ineffective when it came to prohibition. People found ways to drink. They didn't agree with the law. People would go to underground bars called speakeasies, because you had to speak. You had to talk quietly. So it'd be in the back of a library or a regular restaurant, and then you knock on a secret door and they slide it open, then you go in the back and people are drinking and partying with illegal alcohol. There was also a way to get prescriptions. You get a prescription for alcohol from a doctor. I mean, with legalization of marijuana across the United States, and now it's recreationally legal in several states, it started with a prescription model of a doctor could prescribe it for a whole bunch of different things, and that happened with alcohol as well during Prohibition. I have a question for you. Now, I touched on this a little bit, but what's the problem here? People wanted alcohol. The mob bosses provided it. What's the problem? It's just back to kind of the way it was before, right? Well, not quite, because money is power. Money is resources. And before, when it was going to a legal distillery or a legal brew house or something like that, now that money was going to illegal people, criminals, bad guys. These bad guys were getting massive amounts of money. It's the same kind of concept with the drug cartels today, is when you give them millions of dollars and tons of resources to bad people, they do more bad things. So as I mentioned with Coke and Pepsi, well, that actually happened. A rival gang is selling alcohol in your territory, you stop them. There was a very famous Valentine's Day massacre where 7 people were shot with machine guns. People they think it was from Al Capone's group dressed as police officers said, hey, get up against the wall, and then they just mowed them down with machine guns. I mean, this is what gang territories do today, is you have certain territories. You sell your drugs on this block and don't go over to that block. If you go over to that block, it becomes a problem. I mean, this is commonplace in the drug selling game, and it was what happened in the 1920s, and the drug was alcohol. So the banning of alcohol, which was designed to make a reduction in crime and make things better, actually turned out to be much, much worse. It drove it underground. It made the alcohol more dangerous, more potent. It also led to a whole bunch of resources going to people who were murderous. So crime went up. Something had to be done. And what happened was the United States hired a guy named Eliot Ness and a group of people called the Untouchables, because they couldn't be bribed, they couldn't be bought out or anything like that. And they were dead set on catching Al Capone, and they did. They got him on tax evasion. They didn't get him for all the murders. They didn't get him for bootlegging. They got him on tax evasion, but it was enough to lock him away in jail. And in that time, enough people go, wow, this did not work. This was a failure. And they repealed Prohibition. Prohibition was repealed with the 21st Amendment. Here's a good way to remember this. When you're 18, you're a legal adult and you kind of want to drink, but you can't. So it's the 18th Amendment. When can you drink? When you're 21, 21st Amendment. So 18th banned it. You can't drink when you're 18. When you go off to college, you can't drink. But when you're 21, you can. 21 brings it back. It repealed it. It was a failure. You know what, ladies and gentlemen? You're gonna fail a lot in life. And a great reason why we learn history is to learn from past successes and failures. You look at what worked in the past, you go, let's try and apply that today. You look at what failed, like Prohibition, and you go, let's not do that today. And I think there's a lot of applications to look at what is prohibited today and yet is still being used and giving resources to bad people and stuff like that. And what you can do is go, what can we learn from Prohibition's failure and apply it today and in the future? Take a moment to ask yourself about this question. What exists today that you would say is prohibited, but maybe shouldn't be? Or what is a law that most citizens are not behind, but is still a law today? Very important to think about, because we are a democratic republic, and if the citizens are not behind a law, it will not work. And perhaps we should rethink that law. In closing, in your resources folder, I have a very cool animated video talking about all the things that I did in more detail. Check out the clip on Prohibition in your resources folder. That's it, and that closes out the 1920s. Thank you so much for sticking around for these 4 lessons. I'll see you later in lesson 20.